Good. Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for turning up today. This is a hybrid, as we tend to call it. We don't often do these, so the technology is probably going to defeat us at some point today. But anyway, we'll do our best as possible. In the room, we have Kate, Sally, Jenith, and our guest speaker today, Richard, who I shall start with you, Richard, and say welcome. Thank you very much for coming along here and talking about your book, which is lovely here. And just like to point out, Richard, it did the painting. Is it a painting?
It is,
painting picture of the book itself, which is absolutely wonderful. Richard is an accomplished artist, so we're very pleased to his work wherever we can. Thank you, Richard. This is a sort of a presentation from Richard in a minute or two, and then we'll have questions. He and I will be in a little bit of conversation about this topic, and then open up to everybody there. If you're online, could you use the hand up signal to say you'd like to ask a question or comment about anything, and then we can sort of manage the order of how people want to give their ideas. Thank you. So let's start. Richard, welcome indeed. Tell me a little bit about yourself to start with.
Well, I began as a baby.
Yes.
I was a scientist, and then I got involved in computers, as you do. But then I sort of fell into this world of information management in the late 80s. And I took to it like a duck to water, and very quickly got involved in knowledge management as well. So it was very intellectually stimulating having to deal with all these different sectors with all these problems. And I was working basically in that field for 30 years around the world, Middle East, Africa, India, America, even the UK. So, the book really represents a kind of synthesis of those 30 years of working in every sector and dealing with really complex, difficult questions about information, but also knowledge.
Right. That was my next question. The sense is, why this book?
Well, it was kind of like it was something in me that I had to sort of get out. I was sort of getting it out in a way in different bits and pieces in doing consultancy work, but I sort of just had to give birth to it, if you like.
Right.
Without any expectation of, I haven't done any marketing. I've gone on the dark side and published it on Amazon. But that's, mainly because I really wanted all the customers and friends I'd met around the world to have access to it, which, if I published it with a small run in the UK, they wouldn't have had access to it. So it's extremely accessible, and hopefully organically it will find an audience.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I felt that I was in a privileged position, often working with large consultancies like PwC. I was often given the privilege of having to go into situations where they kept on throwing technology at the wall, and for some reason the silver bullets weren't actually solving the problem. So it's a question of that more thoughtful approach of stepping back and trying to ask the why questions and stuff. And that's what I felt that I brought to it. And a lot of that kind of insight is what I tried to capture in the book.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And the title is hugely loaded in many ways. It's trusted knowledge in a digital and fragmented world of work. That sort of sums up so much of where we are with.
Yeah, it took me 5 years to come up with the title as well, because I was shall I call it the architecture of knowledge? And that's very pompous. and Foucault has already come up with that title. So there was, but it trusted doesn't mean the truth.
Right.
Trusted means I understand the provenance of this,
Mhm.
and I can challenge it. But it's about provenance. In that case, it's trusted. I know why they decided to build the HS2 line from London to Birmingham first, even though it's supposed to be connecting the north of England.
Yeah. Right.
Was it the right decision? No. But yeah, and the digital bit is very much because this is working in a world where we have large teams spread around the world. So that's and the fragmented bit is because a lot of these organizations often work in silos. So it's breaking down those silos as well. So, and that's silo busting is a big part of this. Yeah.
And it's interesting that although you've got fragmented in there, it's fragmenting world.
Fragmenting world, yeah. And it seems that more and more technology isn't necessarily leading to more and more insight and wisdom.
No.
So
Right. Well, thank you, Richard. And I shall now start your presentation for you.
So that's 20 minutes, I promise.
20 minutes, you promise. So hold tight, everybody,
Okay.
and I shall see if I can get this bit of technology to go. Is that looking any good yet?
Presentation sitting behind it.
Yeah, it's behind it. There we are.
Yeah.
And go to full screen mode with that. Does that work? How is that for everybody?
Yes. Lovely.
Right, so people offline that are online,
That's it. I can still see people here. So
okay.
it's okay.
Great.
Richard, away you go. I think your clicker should work.
Great.
Leaving you.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for this opportunity, Ian. The picture on the right is a painting I did, which was inspired by a quote from Rachel Carson from her hugely popular book before Silent Spring, The Sea Around Us. And she said that sediments are a sort of epic poem of the earth. When we are wise enough, perhaps we can read in them all of past history. And subsequent to that, the field of isotopic paleoclimatology was able to prove her right. You know, we can read a huge amount about millions of years of our past climate and other aspects of life on Earth. So that for me was a metaphor for institutional knowledge and the importance of trying to preserve institutional knowledge. And that's really why I decided to include it as a cover of my book. Now, when we talk about learning organizations, quite often people will think in terms of Peter Senge, remember the fifth discipline being systems thinking, which is, of course, at the heart of what we do at Schumacher Institute. And these are very much about soft skills. It's not about technology at all. It's about systems thinking. It's about building a shared vision. It's about team working and so on and so forth. It's about deep learning. But particularly nowadays, when people talk about learning and so forth in organizations, immediately they jump to technology, and there's a long list of things there, and you could add AI to that list. I suppose really my book, you could say it's my attempt to bridge these two worlds, because there's a kind of bit in the title. It's neither soft nor hard. It's both, which is about developing shared language, knowledge processes, shared practice, etc. But including some systems thinking, including some techie stuff about how do you build trusted sources. So that's my take on. And actually, it was preparing for this presentation that this is one of the pictures you will see, which is not in the book, because in a sense, having to put this presentation together, it forced me to think fundamentally, what am I doing here? and that's what I'm doing, is building a bridge. One of the pictures that's in the book, there's about 100 pictures in the book, and what I used to find when I was doing consultancy was a picture's worth 1,000 words, they say. And often it was a picture that was used to explain the problem, to try and elucidate an understanding. And so the whiteboard pictures have turned into pictures in the book. And this was one that I used quite a lot because it distinguishes between transaction-oriented systems and knowledge-oriented systems. in one axis, and then the other axis, database-centric versus document-centric. The top right-hand corner are those mission-critical operational systems. So say in a telco, the billing system is fundamental to revenue so IT spends 90% of its time in the top right-hand corner. And in the bottom right is where business intelligence happens. So data from multiple systems is organized into time series data, which can be harvested for insight. The bottom left, you could say, is the kind of Cinderella of IT, because, isn't that just a whole lot of file shares? Well, unfortunately, yes, it is. Thousands of them in most organizations, in large organizations. It ought to be a kind of synthesis that transforms data into knowledge, augmented by narrative and rich pictures. Instead, it's often functional silos, poorly curated repositories. The top left is a kind of soft, high-touch processes which are around decision-making, feeding off knowledge and data. And this is a picture from work I did for a bank, which was looking at those real-time systems feeding statistical analysis, big data analytics, which feeds through into presentations, etc. This is sort of what ought to be a virtuous circle. The stars indicate where this circle is often broken because there's a lack of traceability. So in 10 years' time, someone says, why did we make this big investment in this particular thing? And they'll find a PowerPoint presentation. Well, in fact, they'll find 10 versions of PowerPoint presentation. And then they won't be able to trace it back to the data that was informed that decision, even though they've got loads of data. So there's a lack of traceability. If we think of the built environment or built entity, like a plant here, we'll have documents represented here by X, Y, and Z that are going down the page, multiple versions. And typically in an engineering context, you would have revisions, which are baselines of that set of documentation. So you might have the as designed, and then actually what was built is slightly revised from that. So you have another revision, Rev B. And then little bit later, some upgrades happen and you have Rev C, which is as upgraded. Now, this may seem very boring and so on, but it's actually pretty fundamental to the efficient building of things, but also the efficient operation. And the other point I want to make is quite often this is poorly managed. So we actually don't know what the current state of the building is or the entity. But also, we might know what was built and we might know why it's built, but we're struggling to find why it was built that way. So if you like, that stuff which is so based on context of the individuals involved and so forth, you may be able to squeeze it out of them when they retire on the retirement interview. If you get them in a room, this is often the way to find out, but it's often not written down. Particularly now in the world of AI and stuff, people seem to be trying to find ways to get rid of humans. My view is that in context is so important that you may find ways often where IT can certainly assist you a lot, but we still have the actual experience of someone with their hand in the dirt or the geologist with a chisel at the rock face or whatever it is, who are having to apply their knowledge in the real world in real time and comprehend what they see. And they're trying to then capture, synthesize and categorize and then create a knowledge base, create explicit knowledge that can be moderated and then fed back again. There's no doubt that you can use tools to help you in that process, but I don't think we can engineer the mind and the human being out of this mediation between the real world and our persistent representations of the real world. So in the book, I have this kind of, I've got a philosopher sat next to me. I am not a philosopher. So this is very much a kind of operational definition of knowledge. And for those that maybe are struggling to read the text on here, I'll just read it. At its most valuable, knowledge informs the thoughts and actions of a specific actor within a particular context, place and time, and is therefore highly personalized and fluid in how it is framed and used. It can change in a moment as new information is received or if the context shifts. So this is not, if you like, this is a working definition that highlights the importance of context in distinguishing knowledge from mere information. This is where experts will be asking lots of why questions about what's known. And if we think we move to the digital realm, we'll have digital assets which start with being very informal, actually not even written down, moving to formalized, which means refined, codified, moderated. And then we have ephemeral, moving to persistent representations. And we then try and move to richly codified documents, which form part of a knowledge base. And then crucially, taking up, often, even when people get to the point where they're doing this thing of richly codification, we have people who are insisting on reinventing wheels and not taking up knowledge which exists because the processes aren't in place. So the way I think projects always ought to be run is the front loaded with what do we know, how do we apply what we know, and at the end of projects is what have we learned, how do we enrich what our practice guides and so on. Quite often, particularly in consulting-driven organizations, the first bit and the last bit don't get done. And so it's not surprising that everyone's reinventing wheels or making the same mistakes. There's various chapters in the book that deal with key themes, and one of them is shared language. So one of my clients was a world-beating firm of consulting engineers. I've probably given them away already now. But I went in there to look at their project database, and I rapidly came to the conclusion that they had a problem which I called keyword entropy, because they applied keywords to their projects and documents and so forth, but completely freehand. And what ended up was I suggested that they needed 3 controlled vocabularies. Controlled means they're maintained, and using a kind of ISO standard thesaurus model means you can deal with kind of things like synonyms and language equivalents and so forth in 3 different areas. One was what they built, whether it's airports or theatres or whatever. One was geography, and one was partners, which was architects and so forth. So they could search for religious building in Southeast Asia and find a mosque in Bangkok, for example. And this was quite a revelation to them. But the most interesting thing about the reason for telling you this story is because they went from green screens, with old style tech, through to the client server phase, and then through to the kind of web-based applications. They went through three technologies, but the underlying information architecture was solid and stayed the same because essentially the work had been put in. Too often when we have technology change, we rip up, and therefore we rip up the way that information is managed and so forth, and how it actually looks, under the bonnet. And therefore, what happens is we don't have a sustainable body of knowledge. This is me in a Nordic bank with a wall of paper. So I went to this Nordic bank and I said, because I've been asked to look at their whole information stuff. I don't know why I've been asked to do all that, but it seemed like a big thing to ask. So one of my questions was, how many processes do you have in your organization? And they said, oh yeah, we know the answer to that, 700. So that's interesting. How do you know? So, well, the risk department has all these folders and stuff. Anyway, so I said, well, what about the loan process? Oh, no, that's not one process. And so basically they had a process for each department to hit. So they'd salami sliced this process. And if there were 5 departments touched this process and there were 7 different types of loans, there were 35 different processes. And so I said, well, okay. Can I asked permission to get at least representatives who touch the process from the different departments in a room for 2 days. One day was to understand what the current state was. The second day was to try and map out what the future might look like. And this is looking at the as is process, because you can see some documents are stuck on the wall, because I asked them to bring along any documents they used, and at least half the documents had no value whatever, because all they were doing was moving data from one department to another. If you asked what's the current state of the loan, they had to ring round to find out where the dossier was and to chase people up. So second day was, this was a revelation to them, because no one had ever asked them to do this process, because they all lived in their little silos. So the second day was, okay, I gave them the 20-minute course on best practice in document management, single source of the truth, role-based access, version control, all the rest of it. And then the second day was a clean sheet of paper. I said, okay, now you know the art of the possible. Let's talk through how it might look. So we have a single source of the truth, one place to go for the truth. We have all the privacy controls we need, so we don't need copies of things everywhere. If you want to find the current status of the loan, you can find it in a flash. And you can also see what's left to be done, whether it's, a kind of risk assessment or whatever it is. And after I left, apparently I had a party with Prosecco and stuff, and these sheets were laid on the floor, and they were walking around them, sort of celebrating the fact that they had actually achieved something. But it was really, really good. The way the Big Six would have approached this in the 90s, where there'd been an army of about 30 junior consultants going in there doing 5 levels of IDEF naught diagrams. What this does is say, no, the world is flat. Information doesn't care about your artificial hierarchies. It moves across the organization. So let's ignore those power structures and actually follow the money or follow the document. Information hygiene. So if you go into a theatre in Mumbai, in London, New York, Nairobi, they all scrub up before they go in. They sterilize their equipment, and you expect that. It's part of the culture. It's a core culture. When we look at information in organizations, we have the equivalent of people gardening and then moving straight into theatre because because people send around attachments. There's not there's a kind of lack of a common approach to information which ensures the hygiene, that we're looking at the latest information, that we understand its provenance, etc. And it's not great. And establishing that culture is really hard. But it's not helped by having technology that is, I would say, often naive. Emerging dossier. So this was a pharmaceutical company, came into our little small company in Swindon back in it would have been the early 90s, I guess. So they had the vision of an emerging dossier. So a drug takes 15 years to develop or more. And at the end of it, the regulatory department has to gather together all these documents and then give them to the regulatory authority to approve in each of the various distinct geographies. The idea here was to start off with a skeleton, or this virtual document it was called, on which you can then attach a toxicology report, attach the various entities as they emerge, as they come. So you can see this thing growing its different leaves on this tree, so that by the end of it, it's an easy job then to press the button, and out is generated this massive dossier that can then go off to the regulatory authorities. And it's now become, we helped them build that, it's now a kind of standard way of doing things. I think, again, the reason for bringing that up here is because our view was, okay, this is a big, very mission critical, highly risky thing you've got to get absolutely right. But why wouldn't that apply to a wind farm project? Why wouldn't it apply to any bid you were creating? Why wouldn't it apply to, say, an OBR report going to the British government, which is a digital product, but has multiple authors trying to assemble something, so you don't get the kind of cock-ups that they had? Our view was, no, it applies to anything that you're trying to bid, which is a complex, multifaceted, multi-part, multi-authored entity. And then the document is no longer viewed as, you don't think of it as a PDF file or a Word document. And in fact, I'm going to go too far off piste if I tell this story, but there's there's a document is more to be thought of as a set of Russian dolls, because the central one might be some digital entity like a JPEG file or something. Next level will be very technical stuff like resolution and how it was taken, etc. Next level would be administrative stuff like copyright. Next level would be descriptive metadata. And then there'd be another level which dealt with its relationships and actually the access, linking into access control policies and so forth. That is actually how it's done on, we were doing that, 20, even 30 years ago with modern document management systems, but it's still quite rare for that way of thinking to be implemented in systems. It ought to be standard in all the work that's done in organizations, but it's very rarely is. There are standards around that were invented way back then. Joe Rabin at Reuters invented NewsML, which essentially is a markup language which does that as a kind of standard. So, the idea was with Reuters was that you could have 30 different news organizations firing in news stories using NewsML, and you could assemble them in real time into a package, a news package, for example. But really, it should be something that is just standard for all information. And the benefits being that we understand the provenance, we understand how we can read and update this document, we understand access controls, we build trust preservation and reusability as just outcomes of the way of managing and structuring documents. And so we get this sustainability. We're not having to do a huge amount of work when we come to maintain that bridge in 30 years' time. And then we get to the teams, knowledge and the team, local teams with their project files and knowledge bases, working with experts to then populate an organization's global knowledge base. But sitting behind that is culture and practice, the culture, the sense in which this is how we do things around here. It's not a question of persuading people to behave in the right way. And practices in terms of, that post-project review process that is just built into the way things are done. And slightly more complicated version of the same picture, but just showing different flows that would be occurring, with experts perhaps being seconded onto teams to help local teams apply knowledge that's been accumulated. So key question the book is trying to answer really is how is knowledge shared and acted upon by practitioners in the field? And then how are the learnings captured and incorporated into an evolving body of knowledge? That's fundamentally the question. I don't have all the answers. I think you need a lot of that kind of SENG, soft skills stuff to go alongside. But and you need quite a lot of technology. You need to understand how modern document management systems work, for example, and you'll need some of that AI stuff. But you need a bridge to build it. And I think the book is really about building that bridge. And that's me done. Hopefully I haven't gone too far over.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Richard, indeed. Let me just get ourselves back. Right? And I need to somehow or other stop that. Just acknowledge there. We need to be able to see you all again. Is it nearly there? No. There we go. We're back. Indeed, thank you, Richard. Let me just get myself back in place. That was a fascinating take through a subject which I think many of us knows out there, and we need to be much more aware of it than we are. I think one of the things that you reminded me of when you were talking about working with large companies. Oops, there we are. Yeah. was when I was doing forecasting work at one point, we were generating forecasts, which was an invention of information, which then get passed to another department who processed it, who passed it to another department who processed it and sent it back to us. And there was almost a loop of information going around inside the company, had no contact with reality of what was actually happening in the world at all. So we suddenly realised that this was a waste of time. So that kind of process in a company or any organisation is so important to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I was wondering also was you talked about entropy of information and the way that it tends to dissipate and over time. Could you explain a little bit more about what you mean by it?
Well, it was used in a very colloquial way. I was talking about keyword entropy specifically,
Yeah.
which was a tendency for people to invent terminology or use their own favourite terminology, and the need, particularly in a kind of descriptive metadata terms, is to have a little bit of rigor around that. And the argument that's often used against that, and when Google came along, it says, "Oh, well, you don't need all this curation stuff," and everyone fired all their record managers, by the way, and all those people who looked after records in the past. You don't need all of that because we just run a search over it. How did that turn out?
Right.
I mean, there are techniques in the world that I came from, which are talked about in there, which avoid too much of that need to apply manually metadata, things like metadata inheritance. So, for example, if you have a project file, there's some metadata you can stick on at the project level, then everything underneath it will inherit that metadata, for example. So there are techniques that are applied, and no doubt with AI, there might be, you say, well, I've got these three controlled vocabularies. Can you help me apply them to these documents? So there may be like tactical ways in which AI can be used to assist in this whole bugbear of applying metadata to documents. So, but the entropy bit was really in connection there with I suppose, descriptive metadata. Yeah.
But there is a general sense that information degenerates in a sense over time unless it's maintained and looked after.
Yeah.
And that's a sort of an aspect that requires energy to put into the system in order to keep it alive.
Yeah, I mean, I know a bit about entropy from my science background, but it applied in this information in this sort of colloquial sense. I think the way I might interpret your point is that sometimes you do need a bit of a cleanup. So there is a thing about promoting good stuff. If we've done 30 water projects in Tanzania and 5 were brilliant, 5 were rubbish. I actually did some work for the UN over in Nairobi, so I know a bit about what the kinds of things they're doing. But it'd be nice if we're going to say anything about the 5 rubbish ones, it's about this is not the way to do it, guys. I'm not sure that speaks totally to the entry point, but I think there's definitely a case here where there is a kind of thing of trying to manage that body of knowledge in a way that will promote good practice and try and limit bad practice. Yeah.
It's interesting when you talk about knowledge. I'm thinking that there are sort of very different types of knowledge.
Yeah.
And some of which can be codified, and others which are much more sort of ephemeral in a way. Is there something around that sort of trust aspect of knowledge that you need to be aware of when you start thinking about knowledge, which is much more sort of experiential knowledge rather than knowledge you can actually.
And it may be how you do try and codify it. So, I mean, certainly in the knowledge, that there was a whole practice in, see, they had a knowledge management practice who were different from. So we did have technical tools at ours, but there was very much this thing of, there's tacit knowledge, as though it could never be codified. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I think there's certainly a case for. I mean, I'll take something really prosaic, pruning roses.
Yeah.
I can go and I can get the the Royal Horticultural Society book on pruning, and I can read 10 pages on it. I tell you, I would prefer it for someone who really knows their roses to stand by me and help me and observe. Oh, have you noticed how the bud is going that way rather than that way? Think about that. So contextualize. It's all about this contextualized knowledge. And it might be if you video them teaching me how to prune roses, and someone else who wants to learn about pruning roses will get more from that 2-minute video than they will by reading those 20 pages.
Yes.
So there's something that it's been captured, but not perhaps in the way in which classically we've tended to capture things.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of that. And in terms of these process things, I used a thing called role activity diagrams for capturing process, not these artificial hierarchy things that IT departments sort of roll out, which show armies of people doing. I think those are more engaging. My experience is that customers I dealt with understood those instantly. There's no problem. So I think there's a thing about how good they are doing the job of conveying the knowledge. But I suppose the point I'm making is there's always a kind of tacitish aspect to it in that moment. So actually here with these roses, you're southwest facing and there's a nasty breeze coming from that direction. And blah blah blah, and oh yeah, and the soil isn't so great. Suddenly, all the things that we're expecting sort of AI to suddenly sort of say is great in the moment, in that particular place, standing in that place, that time, as I say, with the knowledge.
Yes.
The expert on roses, Sue, Sue's her name.
Yes.
She can help me.
Yes.
In ways that I would never get.
Yes.
I would never quite reach that level of knowledge transfer. Yeah.
Which is a big contrast to the kind of knowledge that's needed in order to, for example, maintain an aircraft and the sort of the documentation needed in terms of maintenance.
There has to be absolutely. In fact, there's a thing called an aircraft maintenance manual. I mean, you can't do anything without it, without being a record of what you've done and how you've done it, and actually what guidelines you use to do the job. So that those things all have to be linked up.
Yes.
But the other thing about the aircraft industry, bringing it up, is there's a culture of not blaming people for it. Well, there used to be. I don't know what's been happening now with some of the recent sort of things. But there's certainly the culture, which is quite different from healthcare, is there's a culture of not blaming people, and if a mistake has been made, let's all learn from it.
Yes.
Now you're not, so if you've got two industries that behave in a different way, you're going to have different outcomes.
Yes.
And so you need more of that kind of.
Well, this brings us into that realm of trust and trusted knowledge, doesn't it? Because that sort of way of actually not blaming anybody is part of the aspect of trust that you talked about earlier was this transparency and the ability for everybody to understand the provenance of where it has come from. And can you say a little bit more about that trust aspect of knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's all part of the culture and environment. I think we were talking off camera earlier about. There's a quote I'm giving here. There's a Canadian historian called Margaret Macmillan, and she was being interviewed on Desert Island Discs. It's a program we have here, 359. And she was asked by Lauren Laverne, how do you feel about the task that awaits the historians of the future, combing through a mass of digital information to make sense of our age? If you let me, I can read a bit of what she said here. So I don't know what they're going to do because there's going to be too much, I think, and too little. There's going to be endless amounts of email and Twitter, assuming it survives. And I think a lot of governments are now storing it. So maybe it will survive. But I think what's happening, and it's partly through WikiLeaks and other big spills of data, is that people are going to get very cautious about what they say. So governments and government officials aren't putting down on paper or in electronic form what they really think. And that I think is going to be a real problem, because when we look at the past, particularly the 19th century, we can read things that people wrote, and they wrote them knowing that no one was going to read what they wrote except for about three other people. So they were very frank. And so, and to a certain extent, with this Mandelson thing, we could think, well, I'm not going to get caught out like that next time. So we're going to end up with endless screeds of anodyne things without honest opinions necessarily always being stated. I mean, I do talk about potential remedies for that, but I think it is a real issue. Yeah.
That sort of, in a sense, means that we are evolving in our systems. We're learning how to cope with the changes that are actually happening, and with a sense that because trust is being eroded in certain places, we're now learning how to cope with that. And do you feel that there is, moving into this whole field of fake news and misinformation everywhere, that the types of knowledge that we want to preserve and look after needs to be curated very differently to the past?
I think there certainly needs to be this kind of layering thing going on, because there's just too much of it. People are not going to read everything about. If I want to know about because I'm curious about a certain topic, if you just search on that, you might find some interesting things, and if you use AI, it might help accelerate your access to those things. But the book is about institutions and organizations. It's what's happening in say that pharmaceutical company or in community of practice. So all the geologists on the planet, or it might be, etc. So for me, actually, that is a foundation. If we know and we can trust, we can trust what Southwest Water are telling us. then maybe we can use that as a basis. There are some organizations I trust to be good. I mean, on climate policy stuff, I trust Carbon Brief because I've tested their thing. So these islands of trust are really important.
Okay.
There's a whole swath of stuff out there that I'm not trying to address in this book, which is the whole internet.
No.
But on the other hand, if we've got islands of trust, and interestingly, I'm beginning to sound like I'm a salesperson for the Desert Island Discs, but Tim Berners-Lee was on Desert Island Discs, and I really recommend you listen to it, because he was asked about AI, and he said, at the moment, it's, all technology can be good and bad, but he's very much of the view that we need, unfortunately, he used the wrong term, but he said silence, but I'd like islands of trust, which are trusted islands of information. And if we can use AI to look into those islands of trust, then that's good. But I mean, to qualify in my book as an island of trust, it needs a lot more than simply being a dumping ground for things that I think are good. They've got to be, there's got to be provenance, access control. There's got to be all the boring stuff that is still fundamental to building an island trust. But if you've got those, and he's working on this thing called the solid protocol, which would mean that you'd access these things. I don't want to get into a big AI kind of side thing, but on the other hand, I think it's important, because when you look at how AI works, it's sort of these flaws, etc. They've got a horizontal thing which is very large language model. If you ask them a specific question around, if I ask them about, can you explain the geology of the Cotswolds in relation to blah blah blah, they will go deep. They will go to things that they regard as trusted sources. They won't ask Joe Bloggs in Timbuktu, choosing the Cotswolds superior oolite rock. So they try and do it. They try and have it a little bit both ways. But I think even if AI didn't exist, you'd want these trusted sources. And then maybe you can build a bit of a foundation for general trust. I mean, this feeds into political questions of certain political groups want to destroy institutions and destroy islands of trust. So in a certain sense, this is actually important more broadly than simply an interest in knowledge management. It's actually trying to secure some of the foundations on which we make decisions and build policy and take actions, whether it's building a bridge or building a childcare centre or whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to say a little bit more about what you meant by the fragmented world aspect of the book?
Well, it's how organisations are fragmented and how, even big ones that you think will be. There's one large pharmaceutical company where I was asked to look at their what they do outward facing to market their knowledge. They were doing brilliant stuff on the dossier stuff because they'd done that 15 years before, and I think we helped them do it. They were doing brilliant stuff in SOPs in manufacturing because that, you get shut down if you don't do that right. But on the outward facing stuff, I found they had 20 different websites, technologies in Europe. The ones in Finland were built by a guy in the loft on his own. It was just a mess. Turkey, they had old branding and stuff like that. It was a complete mess. So they didn't have a way of connecting, if you like, stuff that was solid. So in terms of even a single organization building, a connectedness between there's sort of islands within islands, trying to connect up the things that are solid with things that are kind of, that they don't pay enough attention to. It's a bit like that grid again. There's certain things. We look after that, but these things are kind of Cinderella aspects of the organisation, rather than seeing it as a connected whole. And in this particular case, this thing I was looking at was the outward-facing part of the organisation. So it was looking at how, if I wanted to look at the safety sheets for a particular drug I was taking, that's pretty fundamental stuff. You don't want that to be somehow at risk of being out of date. Yeah. So fragmentation comes in many forms, but I think it's often because it hasn't been thought through. Is it how do we join everything? How do we look at how the flow of information and the flow of knowledge through organisations?
Well, you're giving us a brilliant picture of the situation that has pertained for a very long time and is still being perpetuated and is probably under even greater strain than ever before because of the technological advances that are coming through, which seem to be increasingly rapid pace as we like to think of ourselves as being a little bit of systems thinkers in the Institute here, how would you sort of connect what you're talking about there with systems thinking work? What would your advice be to people working with organizations, trying to help them with their systemic nature, what they're trying to do? You talked about, systems thinking sitting in a very soft area, with
it was sitting in both.
Yes.
Yeah.
How would you recommend systems thinkers get more involved in some of the issues that are coming out of your book?
Well, it's looking at organizations through different lenses. I mean, one of the ones I mentioned was the process kind of perspective, and not necessarily being high-bound by the current ways in which they work. So one of the kind of methodologies, the process was to build a thing called a process architecture. So what this first needed was identifying, and this came from someone called Martin Old, who was a deep thinker on these, but he's written several books about this, about business processes and organizations. It starts off by looking at what are called essential business processes within a kind of industry. Now these are the essential business entities. These entities are things that cannot be re-engineered out of the organization. It doesn't matter who comes in as boss, you cannot re-engineer these out. So if you're a drug company, there's a regulator, there's etc. And then you can identify at least 3 processes for each of those entities. One is a case process. So take a project. You run a project. A case management process, which is managing a portfolio of projects. And then there's a strategic process, which is how do we learn from and improve the way we run projects? Right. And what I used to do was I'd do a simple table with a traffic light, a kind of red, amber, green type of thing, with the list of the essential business entities and these 3 types of process, and then give them a green or an amber or red. They were mostly green on doing the day job. They were some greens, but mostly ambers on the case management bit. And they were almost universally red on the strategic phase. So, in terms of learning and trying to do things better, they were usually pretty bad at doing that because they were so busy doing the day job. Yeah. So I think one of the key things is, and you can build this sort of process architecture, which is a bit like, it's not a causal loop diagram, it's more an invocation picture of, and I've got a picture in here for healthcare of how different processes invoke other processes. So, and the relationships. And if you've got those relationships, you then begin to come up with a fundamental view of actually what they do. Because it's so easy to get lost in the detail of the things that have evolved over time, which are often very messy. And if you want to get back to a fundamental view, this is one of the number of fundamental views you can have of an organization, which is this process architecture. And if you can develop the process architecture, you can then begin to understand some of the areas where they need to sort of think about, and then you need to understand what's going on in each of those processes. But that's one example of something that is trying to come up with a fundamental analysis of what organizations are doing, and then how to improve how they're working. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. Well, my last sort of question is around scale and Schumacher's concept of smallness. How much of what you talk a lot about large organizations, how much of this is appropriate for the smaller type of outfit that's often living off its wits rather than with resources to do things?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say that if a small organization has aspirations to be slightly bigger and then even bigger and then even bigger, then getting things sorted early on is a very good place to start. Right. Because it's much more difficult once you've got to, say, 500 people to then say, oh, we need to change what we're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I was involved for a large legal practice in London doing a document management system for them, which meant that, and the great thing about the project, it was defined in terms of outcomes, not functions and features. The outcome was a lawyer who flew to New York, sat down at a desk, or could engage on a matter and see exactly what was being seen in London and could participate in that. We delivered that, and this company then acquired about 10 different legal practices across Europe, and they said that one of the key reasons they would be able to do that seamlessly was because they could onboard them onto this system. So there was just one. There was none of this emailing stuff around. I think we banned attachments. Yes. So if you want to know about this matter, you just go to the matter. It's all there. And you'll see what you need to see. You won't see what you can't see, because again, all the access controls based on role, based on need to know. So there's none of this, oh, can I send it to so and all that stuff. A lot of the reasons why you get these data leaks and stuff is because that's been done so badly that people then say, oh, bugger it, I need to get this to Joe. I'll download it or print it and then I'll give it to them.
Yeah.
That's why leaks happen. It's because, and this access control, things like, oh, it sounds like a technical, oh God, why should I be worried about that? It's absolutely fundamental. If you get that right, it makes everything so much easier, because it's only going to, people see what they need to see. They don't see what they don't need to see. And it's a fundamental capacity and capability within organizations that should be. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a really valuable insight.
Yeah.
Get it right.
Yeah, early,
Early.
and then actually you can grow.
Good, good.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed, Richard. I'd now time to open up to the audience and see if we have any questions from anybody. As I said earlier, please raise the hand signal if you can online to ask any questions.
You need to come off mute as well.
Yeah, and come off mute. Any thoughts from anybody? Let's need to what Richard has talked about. We have one in the room at the moment. Mike over there. Hi.
Yeah, I suppose I'm interested in how this applies to maybe like personal interaction with knowledge. So, like, 'cause it sounds a lot about kind of process documents and policies and information within an organization. I suppose I was wondering, what are your thoughts on, because like if I want to know about something, there's a deluge of information that I can go and get. How do you kind of manage your own personal like knowledge consumption?
Well, I mean,
do you have tips that you've learned from doing this?
Yeah, well, this is really about organisation, so it's
Yeah.
not primarily. But I mean, if you're an individual, let's frame it as an individual within an organisation.
Yeah.
So I mean, one needs I mentioned about communities of practice within any organisation. There will be within that consulting engineer example, for example, there will be a sub community of practice which is acoustics engineers. And there will be exemplars, there will be practice guides, there will be, so the navigation into the knowledge isn't just some, tell me about acoustics engineering in the theatre. It will be a structured query, if you like, a structured approach to achieving that, which might actually be through personal contact as well, which but so it's avoiding that just doing a search, whether it's Claude or Google, it doesn't really matter, because in a sense you want the benefit of colleagues who are deeply steeped in that knowledge, so that for example, if you need to know how to have a seat that when it folds up has the same acoustic properties as a human sitting in the theatre, someone must have solved that problem somewhere in our organisation.
Yeah.
And indeed they have. And there's a whole practice guide about the approaches to be taken when you do that. It exists. Quite often this thing exists. It's a question of finding it, but properly structured, and I say with the help of those thematic guides, descriptive metadata, or how different collections are created. You can gain access to it. And importantly, taking on some of the soft skills, actually the process of learning isn't just you on your own, and about having you as a coach guide you through that learning. I think that's really important, because if it's always atomized, so it's individuals on their own, then actually that's not always a great place to learn. It's often better to be helped through that process. So that's we've got a question.
Thank you. We have a question here from Richard.
Hi, Richard. Yes, that was great. It was very provocative, I have to say, because it reminded me some 35 years ago, I was involved in effectively re-engineering a management system for a nuclear power station along with a team of others. And I'm reflecting on what went on there. I mean, at the moment when I did it, it was all very much all hands to the pumps and just get on and do the job. But on reflection, I'm seeing quite a lot of what you're saying was sort of tacitly embedded in what we were doing. Like, we were going around talking to the various sort of heads of department and asking, what did they do and why did they do it? And it was an interesting opportunity for everybody on the station to do that reflection that they normally wouldn't do, because they're all very, very operational. And I'm wondering, again, reflecting 35 years later, whether there's an opportunity that most organizations should take to explicitly talk about the knowledge management system that they tacitly or indeed explicitly use so that they value it. It's not just the, the decoration or, the sort of wallpaper you have in the corporate library. This is actually your culture. And it's a really good opportunity to reflect on what you're doing and why you're doing it. And draw people into those boxes of your four box diagram there that they would not normally be enticed to go into. So yeah, I mean, you resonate very strongly with my experience there. And just another little point about the entropy and information thing. I mean, I say I'm drawing on Prigoghine's work on dissipative systems here, but in that they maintain themselves because there's a constant throughput of energy. Let's call it activity that goes through the system that keeps it, as it were, refreshing all the time. And I wonder if you'd like to comment on that perception.
Yeah, well, so that's the question. Was there a question associated with the maintenance stuff?
Well,
No, the knowledge,
yeah, there
yeah,
wasn't a
because
question as such, but you can pick up on it if you wish.
yeah, I think I think perhaps you're just reinforcing the thing that and the why stuff gets left out. Maybe because it has emotion in it, or it has other things, it has value judgments, and you're not supposed to have those, or I don't know. It is often those why questions don't happen. Which is why I think mature consulting organizations will do both of those things I said, which is you spend quite a bit of time understanding what do we know, how do we apply good practice, do the thing, and then the bit at the end, which is what have we learned, and then feed that back into artifacts. In terms of it's about having, I suppose, privileged. You might call them privileged artifacts, which might be a technique paper on how you do that reflecting seat, which is a kind of a summary and synthesis of different projects. And we get another project come along that does it even better. So we upversion the technique paper. We don't just make the search problem bigger. We actually make the problem always as simple as possible because we know where to go to answer certain questions. On Prigionine, big fan, but I'm not sure I can add anything. I think there is something there about something, but I don't think I can offer anything profound on that. I haven't. I'll probably think of something on the drive home, but yeah. Sorry about that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mark, good to see you.
And you. Okay. All my research on this, when I did it, was looking at interpersonal trust in organizations in small firms. And what what intrigued me was how it was that trust was that thing which overcame barriers to cooperation. So people implicitly, intuitively establish barriers to cooperation based on their perceived importance of the situation, their perceived economic possibilities, their professional status, and how their professional status will change according to engaging with this other person. And so it's the trust that overcomes that. The fascinating thing is when you get stress in a group, it will be because one of the key actors, the key strategic actors in that group, doesn't have sufficient trust in the other people to overcome their cooperation threshold. So you have one group, one part of the group is willing to cooperate, and the other part of the group simply isn't. And the challenge as a consultant was always to work out what the stress was and how you can unpack it and enable the cooperation to occur. One of the classic examples that a friend of mine always used to cite was trying to get people, the engineers in British aerospace, to actually realize that Homo sapiens were not just omnivorous bipeds that walked around damaging nice, beautiful instruments. Once he got them to realize that Homo sapiens were worth something more than that, then they would actually come to the party and engage in a managerial setting. So that interpersonal interaction is terribly important, as well as at that other higher level. So how did you experience those interpersonal interactions developing in the course of the work that you were doing?
That's a good question. I think a lot of what you're speaking to is if that first slide I did, which was the kind of the soft skills, then there's the hard technology, and then there's this sort of stuff I was mainly concerned with, is trying to bridge those worlds.
Yeah.
I wasn't working so much in that kind of social psychology aspects, but to a certain extent, I saw myself personally is building trusted relationships as part of the work I was doing. And not you go to the organization and people said, no one's come to us for 5 years, you know. And it's almost like almost like I was the Messiah. Someone was talking to the government, you know. But it is interesting if one's having the right conversations, those trust barriers can break down. And in fact, sometimes people can be incredibly open. You know, as one engineer said, "Oh, I don't trust their network, and I'm going off to some lousy place where there's hardly any network." So he was flying around the world with mission critical, incredibly valuable data on exterior drive. But he told me, but only after I built that kind of trust thing. And of course, it went into my notebook, but it didn't go into a report. I mean, there was something, yeah. Margaret Macmillan, sorry about this, but I did say something like there are issues with data being, you know, so there's a way of expressing the truth without actually sneaking on it. But I think those interpersonal skills are incredibly important. But I think that's my wider point was about culture, and there's a culture of learning, a culture of, and I think trust is part of that. A very, very, very important part of that. But also having a no blame culture as well, because if you might have personality issues with somebody, which means you instinctively don't trust them. But if you're working within a no blame culture, you perhaps can overcome some of those things in order to make sure you get the job done. So I would say it's incredibly important, but it doesn't necessarily totally jinx if you like, the enterprise if one can get the right environment. Is my take on that.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, no blame cultures reduce the risk, you see. And
Yeah.
risk is a big effect on barrier. The higher the risk, the higher the barrier to corporations. You reduce the chance of blame, you lower the risk perception. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah. Right. In the room we have Jen. You've got a.
Oh, thanks. Fascinating, Richard, and a lot to take in. And I'm honestly, I think we could have several sessions on your book. Quite honestly, so think about that. But no, I was just thinking one of the things that could make the link there, perhaps, is the notion that there's difference between cognitive empathy and emotional empathy in people. And I guess, I mean, I'm not suggesting that empathy is the root of everything, but I think that what you're talking about on the, organizational and knowledge management side is something that helps enable people to communicate better cognitively. And also then potentially, I would think, understand better where different people are situated with regard to the organization and their job. And so it would help cognitive empathy, which it does actually help emotional empathy as well. Because if you don't understand where other people are coming from in a sort of rational sense, it can be actually quite difficult. What I'm saying is that there are a lot of human emotions which are totally bound up with rationality, and so it's not a separate sort of thing, as well as you were saying, Mark, in terms of their own personal state and whatever.
Yeah.
But I had Um, yeah, and with regard to, I mean, interdisciplinary projects, for example, I mean, one of the things that I was stunned really to discover was that, you know, huge amount of money going into a project, but it's only towards the end that they discover that the leader of the project has been using particular diagrams, a sort of conceptual frame for the whole thing. And more than half of them didn't really know that, you know?
Yeah.
So
It's well, it constrained the way the project was run, and yeah.
absolutely, it did. And so I suppose what I was thinking was, this is, I mean, it's a bit of an eye opener, you know, in some ways, because I'm putting this sort of through a filter of other types of organizations that might need these things, but don't appear to be using them very much. And I guess I was just thinking about, well, this level of sophistication that you're talking about, and the sort of the power of corporations in our world, and the apparent inability of governments to get their heads around a lot of things. I mean, aren't we really looking at a huge sort of gap in the ability of government to do a lot of these things?
Capacity.
Yeah, capacity. And it's just a reflection. I mean, obviously,
there's
it's
a
a
lot.
huge question, but
Yeah.
I just wonder if you'd ever thought of, you know, if you had thoughts about that yourself every now and again, sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean,
governments are forgetting organisations.
yeah, and it's really, I mean, there's so much in what you said. I'm not sure I can do justice to it, but it's sort of on the emotional thing. Yes, I mean that can surface in such interesting ways. I mean, we know from personal relationships, and particularly if you've been married to someone for 40 years, you know, you can have a situation where you say something and it isn't actually what. Let's leave my wife out of it. But no, but you can have people who are quite close, and it's but maybe getting to the point can sometimes be quite painful, and it might be you talk about that, but what you want to talk about is that. And in an organisation, it may say, "Well, I have an issue with this because," but actually, the real issue is I feel as I'm losing control.
Yeah,
and I think a good consultant, I used to think I was one, would anticipate that, you know, and you know, you try and pre-handle some of those emotional reactions.
sure.
But I think that's why this isn't just a linear technical process. It involves human beings, you know, and they need to be dealt with. And just on the second bit, which is about governance and so on, I think governments and things, I mean, there was a time 10 years ago when ministers were saying, oh, well, the thing we need to do is we need to get everyone to be coders, you know. Give me strength. And now they're saying, oh, we don't need coders because AI can do all the coding. Yeah, but who writes the spec on which the coding is done?
Exactly.
So, and I've got one of my sections in here is called the Zeitgeist of the Coder, which well, I talk about when Marilyn used
Another session.
Marilyn used to be financial director of Snow Business, which was the world leading snow effects company. And whenever we went to a film, it was only snowing it. We would stay and we would see all the credits, and it would go on with a modern film. It goes on for about 10 minutes. But the analogy I do with an IT project, the credits are project manager, you know, the data architect, programmer, cut. You could get your code. I said, well, what about the ontologist? You know, let's have a roll. How about the cultural historian? How about the, you know, etc. What about all these other things that they, you know, the process architect? Where's the process architect? You know, so it's the dumbing down, even of, you know, forgetting about information management and knowledge management, the dumbing down of the technology, and just need coders and then the world will be okay. And now we just need AI and the world will be okay. Well, when Google came out, it's this value-free technology that will do everything you want. And there was a great book written by the head of the French library, and I can't remember his name. So
yeah.
Oh, yeah. So how many poetry, how much book? I don't think you use Nigerian poetry, but if I'm interested in poetry, is it going to surface great Nigerian poets? I don't think so, because they're going to be scanning all these books, apparently. They're going to be scanning all books. They're going to be scanning Anglo, English poets and English. So the value bias, if you like, and that will be embedded in the system. And then after a few years, when I search on, I'm interested, my daughter's asked me about Baroque music and the use of different instruments and certain types of Baroque music. I'm getting adverts for instruments and for various books on the, not answering the question, because they're trying to sell me something. It's a monetization. Do we really think that AI is not going to go down the same road? It'll be commercial values that will take over. So it might be very free and easy at the moment, a bit like Google, and then very rapidly it's going to turn into a monetized thing where you're getting what they want you to see, not necessarily you're actually after, which is this sort of slightly nuanced, but for
You're lucky it's just monetized. I mean,
yeah,
it's actually sheer profit.
Yes, yeah. So I'm not against AI, as I say in the book, but I think that we need to not imagine it's yet another that's coming on, on the white charger, and is going to somehow solve all the problems with how we deal with our information and knowledge. That's my my little extra little speech you got for free there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mike, you a
How
question?
we doing?
Yeah, just in terms of like how this crosses over systems thinking. For me, after reading Patrick's book about the grammar, systems thinking, and the mindset principles of how you look at systems, it seems to me that you can look at information and knowledge in different. I'm also thinking about how Luhmann looks at things where you have different things have boundaries around them. So certain information will have a boundary around it. And other pieces of information will be easily related to each other, and other pieces of information won't. And within that system of how the information is rubbing up against each other, you potentially will get different forms of emergence happening as a result of that information flow within a system. And then it's kind of like dependent on how it's being structured, like systemically, where are the bottlenecks, where who can see what, who can't see what, who can access what, will result in the form of emergence within that organization. And moving boundaries around or making relating easier or more difficult between pieces of information will result in different kinds of outcomes, I would imagine. So that I suppose I'm thinking about if I was looking at it from a systems lens.
What's the question?
Well, I suppose you can if you're thinking about how it's over systems thinking, well, I suppose it's like how you design information and knowledge system will define what emergence you get within that organization in terms of how who gets what information.
Yeah.
So if like you say, if you
but it depends very much on. So for me, systems thinking can have a very broad range of definitions and so forth. But broadly speaking, it's about looking at the whole. It's looking about
so it's holistic.
It's looking about interconnections and relationships. It's looking about different timelines. There are a number of system thinking habits, shall we say, that you think the actual techniques one uses can vary a lot. Is it causal loop diagrams? Is it sort of maturity models? Is it these, some things that are not necessarily labeled as systems thinking techniques may still be used in the spirit of systems thinking. I like to think, that the book has a lot of those. But in terms of the culture of knowledge, so it may be that in many organizations, the default should be that you see as much as possible subject to Chinese walls, intellectual property, commercial sensitivity, health and privacy issues and so on. So, my advice to organizations would be, don't don't create boundaries where you don't need to. That would be the thing. Unless you're an intelligence agency, in which you need to know. So that you can't have an open access in an intelligence agency. You've got to have need to know. And
But if you have open access, you might have a different form of emergence, which is what we saw with WikiLeaks, for example.
but in general, you don't.
I'm not saying you're wrong.
It may be there are practice guides that are on the actuality of they spotted that car and that, which rise above that, which are the practice of a thing and policies. So you get the head of MI6 appearing on Radio 4 talking about risks of this and that on this particular topic. That's fine, but about a particular agent doing a particular thing. So and it will vary. If it's a drug development, you can imagine they might be very, very secretive about certain aspects of it. But if in terms of their general policies on or where they're putting their therapeutic research, now we're wanting to focus now on emergent diseases due to climate change. We're going to be looking at this class of treatments and so forth. They might be very open about that and even to the external world. But in terms of the detailed specific project, they will grade it accordingly. So I don't think you can come up with a single rule for all organizations, because they should be able to tune it accordingly to their and if they have tools, it should be very easy to tune. And the point about this complexity, it seems very complicated, incredibly complicated, but we don't have any problem driving around, because they used to be really complicated on their own, because you had to get out every 5 minutes and start them up. And when I was shared gaskets when I was 50, things like that. So you knew about the innards of cars in those days. Now it's a black box. You can't actually touch the damn thing. So the complexity is hidden. And I think the experience of how you access knowledge ought to be simple and easy, and all that complexity should be configurable and adjustable, but hidden away in a way that is maintainable. And so you get that sustainability kind of thing going on. Yeah. So is there anything online that we're missing? Are we missing anything from?
No, it's just somebody's going to buy your book, so that's good news.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, how much is your book?
Well, go to the yeah.
It's an embarrassing price.
No, it's not embarrassing. There's a hardback and a softback, and then there's an e-book.
There's one.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
Well, thank you, Richard.
yeah.
So
I
lots
don't see anything else on. Is there anything else up there?
nothing else in the chat. So, has anybody any more questions at all?
I don't have any other questions, but I just wanted to say thank you. It's interesting. It's all quite new for me. I'm not I'm still trying to get my head around a lot of what you shared. But
Yeah.
I guess I come from more of a media background. So for me, I think the part about information is quite interesting, like how we share information. There was one part you were talking about a system for routers that was about sharing information over documents. And nowadays there's a lot of sorts of ways of sharing. So I use like Notion, but there seems to be lots of new technologies emerging for sharing knowledge. So yeah, I was actually wondering if you had anything quite practical about like systems for sharing knowledge or managing knowledge that you came across.
I'm trying to avoid recommending technology or stuff like that, and I'm probably a little bit out of date on some of that, because I think, in my 30 years, I saw so many different technologies coming around, but I'm focusing very much on the fundamental attributes, if you like, of what's needed, rather than the latest. Yeah, we've invented another kind of repository with another place and so forth. Because a lot of that is kind of at the surface level, and a lot of what I'm talking about here is, if you like, sustainable, because technology cycles are quite rapid, But if you do the design of a bridge or something like that, and you've got to maintain it over 50 years, you can't be like, you need to find a way to make that, something you can deal with over a long time. If you invent a drug, from it being removed from market, I can't remember the time, but it might be 25 years or 30 years. You've got to maintain that information. You've got to keep it, because if there are side effects that appear 10 years after it was withdrawn from market, you need to be able. So so those might seem like big, complex things, but on the other hand, it could be a range of things where actually that longevity is really important, including our personal information, where that becomes, important to be able to have something that's sustainable over time. And the kind of the layer on top, which is how we experience it, is often just evolving very, very, very rapidly. And if you look at for example, if you look at what happens if you go into some of these organizations and look at their IT infrastructure, you find they've got some really old systems at the bottom, then some medium range age systems underneath, and then some very new systems that are laid on top. It's often a bit, the rude term is called lipstick on a pig, isn't it? Often there's a lot of that going on with these large organizations. Because they're afraid to touch, afraid to touch the systems that are underneath, because they're written in, and they're very, very scared about completely rewriting, goodness. Yeah. So it's so that doesn't really answer your question, but I think the point is I don't have, this is the best thing to do now, because it will not be the best thing tomorrow.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I guess not from my experience, but my sister works, she's a manager in the NHS. So a lot of the issues they face is that there's just everything's moving all at the same time. And when something goes wrong, it's just like impossible to get to the root cause. And like you can't change the system because everything's almost functioning in that way. So if you move one piece, then you have to move everything.
Well, they poured billions into Accenture and Fujitsu to come up with the future IT standard, which all simply sat on this very, very precarious little foundation, which is this little software thing they were using for electronic records. Anyway, they away from it. So there was billions wasted. In the book, with the permission of my wife, I've got it covers 20 years. It's a time diagram showing interactions with the NHS for her breast cancer. She's a survivor. But it shows all those interactions. Can you imagine all the IT changes that have happened in that period? But we still don't have an electronic health record that I think is fit for purpose. So I recently got cancer, prostate cancer, and I'm in remission, and that's fine. But I happen to go in and they have to test my PSA and so forth. So the oncology department in Cheltenham sends me a little form, which I then take in to the GP. They then do a blood test, and then the results get put on their system. For me to see it, I then have to ask the nurse at the GP practice. She has to download it, so then the data then is replicated on the GP system. And then I see it, and then I can see it on my app. Then I can see it on the GP app.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's kind of because they did have the money to do a proper job, but the people screwed up because again the way in which IT is approached is often to scale the teams up as quickly as possible rather than working out what's going to work before actually scaling. So that's one, and then they revert back to this cottage industry approach of doing a plaster there and a plaster there and a plaster there because they're good at plasters, aren't they? So, and it's a mess, but and we see it every day when we go in to see that stuff, and it's not the fault of the doctors and so forth. Well, sometimes it may be because maybe they were asked to take part in a really good prototyping exercise, which involved a lot of interaction a lot of working with teams to work out what was going to work, and they said we don't have time. So I can imagine that with some of the problems that happened 10 years ago, but it's really so I do say quite a lot about healthcare in there at the end. It's quite close to my heart. Yeah. Anyway,
It seems like a lot of people nowadays will just download the results on their app and then put it into ChatGPT and tell it to analyze everything, so that they don't even have to get the ChatGPT will tell you more than a doctor can, in a sense. So yeah, that's another weird
I'd refer that. Yeah. Anyway, let's not go. I think there's another hand up actually. Sally, thanks so much.
Sally,
Yes.
Sally first here in the room.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm just all very new to me, and I'm a scientist, scientific background, so data from that sort of access. I was just interested in something that popped up for me when you were talking about process of the 3 levels and strategy, and I couldn't help wondering how personality affects that. Who is involved in those different aspects and how that works to sort of come together. And then I kind of went there to the extreme case of you've got a very strong personality and in charge of a massive company who has masses of money, would not be the sort of person who would call for advice from the outside, presumably, but that's completely outside all of this, isn't it? You can't really engage in anything in a company like that.
Well, yeah. So the third bit, they may be different kinds of people. Yeah, because the kind of second thing would be someone who's good at managing resources and sharing and doing those things. So there's people that do that. The strategy thing isn't necessarily a single group. It shouldn't really be people that live in an ivory tower deciding on strategy. It should be more of a kind of process of trying to understand what the future should be, and it should be something that's an evolving thing that's looking at the horizon and what's coming over the horizon. So there's definitely people, and that's where some systems thinkers could really help as well. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but on the kind of strong personality, but it might also be that the strong personality is not the whole. It is in theory the whole of the budget, but it's actually being devolved down to somebody who then asks the question, and it ends up being a quite narrowly framed question. And then you get someone coming in like me who says, actually, this is too narrow a question. So I remember I went to Washington for one of those large institutions in Washington where they were just basically, they'd bought a whole lot of software and they couldn't make it work in the sense that they didn't see how it would work. And it's because they saw it purely in transactional terms. Even though they had brilliant people there, they had the head of archiving was a professor from Sorbonne. They loads of people, but again, I found this problem of they never got in the room together. So I did my usual thing of being quite brave and saying, "Can I get them in the room, please?" And then interesting things started happening, and they said, "No, the real exam question is." We're so used to being able to answer all our questions, our knowledge sharing through by the water thing, we can physically get together, but we realize we have to get out, we have to be able to do this in Nairobi and in Bangkok and so forth, and we have to be able to get out there and still do that, but we have to now start doing it in a more distributed, fragmented, digital world. And that's where the challenge was. So it was the biggest value I did on that project was getting them to clarify what the exam question was, because it started off purely transactional. We need someone who licensed this wonderful technology, but actually no one had really articulated what they were doing in a real way. So I think that's really quite important. We've got that.
your question there.
I just thank you for your presentation. Very informative, and it's wonderful to understand more about international culture. Sally, you may want to check out a book called Wicked and Wise. It looks at for CEOs, governments, and I guess NGOs. There's 7 questions in there that they have asked such people to solve what they're calling wicked problems, such as climate change, which are not, they don't have solutions. It's not like you go build a carrier and you can see the problem and you can see the solutions. The problems are dynamic. And so there is never an answer that will solve everything every time they, as you said, implement something, Richard, that might have worked in the past, but you don't have communication between these decision makers across silos. That old approach to thinking, the non-systematic linear thinking simply doesn't work. And yeah, so that was my comment. I understand about technology. I have stuff on CD-ROMs. I don't have a CD player in my computer. I have stuff on those ancient floppy disks. I have my wedding video on a teeny video, those micro camera videos. I've got to go find someone and pay audio recordings, I've got a little box like from my granddad who was part of the Peace Corps in the early 1900s and came to the United Kingdom to do work on a friggin' like ship. And I recorded what he felt were the most important stories and then visions for the future. And for years, I have hoped to translate these. So I understand that, and I think at a personal level, it's an issue, and even archives in an organizational. Now, we used to have privacy, so maybe those records from a law enforcement perspective and so on should stay on microfiche, such that we still have a little bit of privacy. Again, Richard, thank you for your presentation and for hearing everyone.
Did you have a question?
No, I simply wanted to comment and thank you.
Okay, no, I like questions, but I like comments as well. So that's good.
Yes, much appreciated.
It's interesting. Yeah, the last project it was a national archive for a country, and they had these old records. Some of them were, and it had been the British had been there. Where haven't they been? But some of these bits of paper, it was written in Arabic one way, and then the other way around, it was written in English on the same piece of paper. And they had this genius woman who could speak about 10 languages, but she could read this thing, even though it was written in tiny handwriting. But there was lots of questions there about what they deal with those ancient records, and also the flood of digital records that are already coming through, and how do you build a massively scalable, resilient, readable thing going future. So how do you build these standards that are going to be resilient to technology change and so forth? There are answers to that, and there's another section in there. There's a section in there about this whole business about building these massively scalable things, not in technical terms, but in terms of their capabilities and where we need to go with it. But it's certainly a growing issue, if you like. And the problem I see at the moment is that we're kind of delegating that to private companies, so to Google, to Microsoft, and so forth, who also, I learned, are owning most of the new cables. I mean, they're quite a bit small, that are going across the world, so that we've got a whole body of infrastructure that's in private hands, and yet it's critical. It's going to be not only where we store a lot of this information, but also I'm going outside the organisation to the public domain, but also how we transmit it as well. So this is concerning. I think public the public realm has to start sort of getting its act together, I think, here. I think we're letting it drift in a way that I think is unhealthy. So,
Thank you, Richard.
Well, hopefully in America, if young people ever get into politics, because we have ancient people that never resign, maybe some of those youngsters will be able to bring modern thinking to policy making.
yeah.
I mean, my God, we had a Supreme Court justice who didn't even know one of the social media platforms. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Tally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, we apologize for our country and our mind-boggling and appalling and just like
Yeah, we've been doing that for a long time.
craziness. We apologize. We're really sorry. Truly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who is without sin casts the first stone, isn't it? Yeah.
Jen, did you?
Oh, I just thought it would be interesting to make a little philosophical point, which is quite a big one. I just wanted to get back to one or two things. I mean, this is also with regards to information destruction, which is clearly the aim of some people currently, as you were saying. And there are various things that people are trying to do to avoid this. And you know what I'm talking about, Sally. So
are you calling that sort of getting rid of climate data and stuff?
well, stuff like that, yes.
Okay.
But the other sort of finer points about realism, let me say, some kind of philosophical realism seems to be implied by a lot of what's being said. But in terms of what you were saying, Ian, about how these things can sort of circulate, these frameworks can kind of circulate and get added to without actually hitting the ground at any point. And the whole point about entropy and how if you're going to refresh things, then isn't there some element of contact with reality, however we want to talk about that has to be in there for that to actually really count as a refresh? Just in the sense that, so one of the things I noticed, for example, was that you were saying, well, if you've got a drug company, then, there's a certain things that you've got to do because of regulation. So of course, I mean, if massive deregulation comes in, and this also applies to the aerospace industry, according to some people, deregulation comes in because of all sorts of political things, then, we begin to, that's surely when the entropy of a lot of these things increases, because regulation is partly about looking at when things go wrong, isn't it? Yeah. Holding people to account. And that has some kind of relationship to data and reality and, things that really happen, because a lot of things we're talking about do have some bearing or have to be used in various different ways and have outcomes. I just, that there's some, it seems to me that there's some implicit, at least, form of realism at the back of a lot of what you're saying here.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in terms of talking about language, using language which is grounded in, if you like, the real world. To use a philosopher's term, ontology, which isn't just abstractions always. It's about real things and how we're in contact with those. But my concerns often with, if we're going to have trust, there's probably quite a lot of distrust of pharmaceutical companies and so on around. I think some of it's fair and some of it's maybe less fair, but I think that there needs to be more openness and transparency about what things they're doing and how they do them and so on and so forth. And one of them would be, okay, so how come Ebola virus, they managed to pull that off in, 18 months or something like that, but only when it threatened to come into America? They've been around for years. So Africa gets the short end of the stick, sort of thing. And we're good, if you're a woman, they seem to focus a lot on the kind of the things that women care about, which is perhaps, they finally recently announced treatment for menopause that does not involve HRT. And this is something, is this because this is an incredibly advanced research, or is it they just didn't have it on their to-do list? And so it's whether it's a pharmaceutical organization or whether it's another organization, it's not always what they do. It's again back to the why questions. Why are they doing the things they're doing? Are they asking all the why questions? Because why, it's like the child, isn't it? Why? So yeah. And the answer is, we in that case, but there's a lot of problems in this world that I think come from not asking those questions early enough, or only asking them at the end. When you've had a complete, a complete, the HS2 is a great example of where it's it's just a nightmare, if you like, and so I think for me it's your questions are really important, but I think that it is about a kind of breeding that culture of being able to ask open questions and be able to get sort of trusted answers to those questions in context, and that's really important, whether you're within the organization or whether you're standing outside them and trying to create a relationship of trust with them, whether it's a drug company or government department or whatever it is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Richard. You've imparted a great deal of knowledge to us today, and leaving me, we trust it.
There we go.
So thank you very much indeed, and we'll go forward, with a very clear idea of how we'll be seeing this world in which we live, which is, we all every day are in a world of information, and that's what we need to understand a lot more about what it is and how it's transmitted and how we use it. So I think I would highly recommend your book to everybody. Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Well, thank you for hosting.
Thank you, Rich, indeed, and thank you everybody online for coming today, and look forward to see you again soon. And I'd like to say that the technology did stand up, just about. Thank you.
You're going to save that chat, because
Oh, yeah.
she wants to see everything, so it'd be nice to see that.
Yeah, there's some interesting comments back there from Richard and Tally, so can do that.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Good.
I need to actually say stop this so I can then get the recording saved as well.